The winter air at Fort Jackson could cut through bone. The training yard was a wasteland of frost-bitten mud, fog rolling over the fields like ghostly smoke. Every morning at 0400, the bugle screamed the recruits awake. And the real battle began, not with guns or enemies, but with the voice in their heads whispering, "Quit." For Sarah Whitmore, quitting wasn't an option. She had survived the humiliation of the first weeks, the laughter, the endless drills designed to break the weak. Now, as December settled in, the tests grew harsher. Obstacle courses were coated with ice, rifles felt like frozen iron, and the cold tore at every uncovered inch of skin. "On your bellies," Sergeant Cole roared. 50 recruits dropped into the mud. Sarah's breath burst out in clouds as her body hit the freezing earth. She crawled forward through a tunnel of barbed wire while water seeped through her sleeves. The men beside her cursed under their breath. Sarah said nothing. Her lips were blue, her teeth chattering so hard she could barely think. By the time she reached the end, her elbows were bleeding. Cole blew the whistle. "Up! You got 30 seconds to sprint to the next station." Sarah staggered to her feet and ran. Her boots splashed through the icy puddles, every step a small war. That night, back in the barracks, the heat barely worked. The wind howled through the cracks in the windows. Recruits wrapped themselves in their blankets, shivering. Some whispered complaints about the day's training, others about Cole's cruelty. Sarah sat at the edge of her bunk, fingers raw and bleeding, cleaning her rifle. "You're gonna lose your hands if you don't stop," said Mason, sitting across from her. Sarah smiled faintly, without looking up. "Then I'll learn to shoot with my teeth." Mason chuckled, shaking his head. "You're crazy, Whitmore." "Maybe," she said. "But I'm still here." The truth was, she wasn't sure how much longer she could keep going. Every night she lay in bed and felt her muscles twitch in pain. The cold crept into her bones and stayed there. But whenever she closed her eyes, she saw her father's old truck in the driveway, the American flag fluttering beside it, and his words echoing like a heartbeat. "Earn it." So she trained harder. While the others rested after dinner, Sarah stayed outside, running laps around the field under the floodlights. The guards called her the Ghost, always there, always silent, moving through the night like someone running from her past. By the third week of winter training, Sergeant Cole had noticed. He didn't say it aloud, but every morning his eyes flicked toward her. She was thinner now, her cheeks hollow, but her movements were sharper, faster. There was no hesitation in her steps anymore. During a 10-mile march through sleet, most recruits groaned under the weight of their packs. Sarah was dead silent. When one recruit's strap snapped and his gear tumbled into the snow, she was the first to kneel down and help him repack. Cole saw it. He didn't interfere, but he saw. "Whitmore!" He barked later that afternoon. Front and center. Sarah hurried over, standing at attention. Cole studied her like a man trying to solve a puzzle. "You planning on dying out there?" "No, sir." "Then stop running laps after lights out." "You think I don't know?" Sarah froze. "Sir, He stepped closer, his breath clouding in the cold air. "You're not going to impress me by killing yourself, Whitmore. You want to be a soldier? Learn to survive, not self-destruct." "Yes, sir." "Good. Now drop and give me 50. Sarah hit the ground, counting under her breath. Her arms shook by the 20th push-up. By the 40th, she was gasping. By the 50th, her muscles were screaming. Cole leaned down and muttered, "That's the difference between most recruits and you, Whitmore. You don't stop when it hurts. You stop when it's over." She didn't respond, but that night she didn't run laps. Instead, she sat outside under the stars, holding her father's dog tags in her hand, the metal freezing against her palm. "Hope you're watching, Dad," she whispered. Because I'm not backing down. The next morning brought the coldest day of the year. The recruits were ordered to perform a full combat simulation, 3 hours of crawling, sprinting, and target shooting in icy conditions. It was brutal. Some recruits' fingers went numb. Others' boots froze solid to the mud. By the second hour, the ground was a graveyard of dropped helmets and lost breath. Sarah's uniform was soaked through, her lips cracked and bleeding. But when the whistle blew for the shooting range, something inside her clicked. She took her rifle, dropped to one knee, and fired. Crack, crack, crack. Every shot hit dead center. Cole lowered his binoculars slowly. "That can't be right," he muttered. He checked the targets again. Every single one bullseye. When she finished, Sarah set her rifle down with trembling hands. The recruits beside her stared, stunned. One muttered, "What the hell?" Cole's voice boomed. "That's what accuracy looks like, gentlemen. Try keeping up." Sarah said nothing. She didn't need to. That night, when the barracks went dark, Sarah sat awake again. Her muscles ached like fire. She pulled off her boots, revealing blood-soaked socks, and cleaned the blisters with a shaky hand. Her bunkmate, a quiet recruit named Alvarez, whispered, "You okay?" Sarah smiled faintly. "Just tired." Alvarez hesitated. "You make it look easy." Sarah laughed softly. "It's not. It's never easy. That's why I love it." Then she reached for her father's dog tags, tracing the engraved letters with her thumb. Staff Sergeant James Whitmore, United States Army. She whispered to herself, "You taught me how to fix engines, not how to survive this." But I'm learning. Outside, the wind howled against the windows, rattling the thin glass. Sarah leaned back on her pillow, staring at the ceiling. Her body was battered, her mind stretched thin, but inside her chest, something burned. It wasn't anger. It wasn't pride. It was something pure. Fire. The kind that comes when a person refuses to break, no matter how cold the world becomes. Days turned into weeks. The frost gave way to rain. The training got harder, and yet Sarah never slowed down. She learned to handle her rifle blindfolded, to disassemble and reassemble it by touch. She memorized tactical maps, outscored half the class on endurance drills, and never once complained. When graduation day finally appeared on the horizon, she was still behind the strongest recruits, but no longer underestimated. Cole gathered the platoon one morning and said, "Most of you will walk out of here and never remember this winter. But some of you will. Some of you will remember the cold that tried to kill you and the fire that kept you alive." His gaze locked briefly with Sarah's. It wasn't a smile, but there was respect there, something unspoken. That night, as the floodlights flickered over the empty field, Sarah walked outside one last time before lights out. She stood in the center of the yard, breathing in the cold air, feeling it burn her lungs. She looked up at the stars and whispered, "I made it through the cold, Dad. I'm still standing." Then she slipped the dog tags under her shirt and headed back inside. Tomorrow, the next phase of her journey would begin, one that would push her beyond pain, beyond exhaustion, beyond what anyone believed possible. But for now, she let herself rest. Because even fire needs time to breathe. The morning sun over Fort Jackson was merciless, spilling gold light across the asphalt parade ground and burning through the morning fog. Recruits lined up in perfect rows, boots shining, backs straight, hearts pounding. Most of them were men, big, broad-shouldered, loud, and full of swagger. And right in the middle of them stood Sarah Whitmore, 5'4", quiet, and utterly out of place. She wasn't what anyone imagined when they thought of a soldier. Her sandy brown hair was tied into a neat bun. Her uniform was slightly loose around the shoulders, and her duffel bag looked too heavy for her frame. A few recruits smirked when she adjusted the strap on her shoulder for the third time. One of them, a towering kid from Ohio named Mason, whispered just loud enough for others to hear, "Guess they'll take anyone these days." The group laughed. Sarah didn't respond. She simply stood there, eyes forward, jaw locked. Inside, though, she felt the sting. She'd been through this before. High school football practices where she was told to stick to cheerleading. Mechanic shops where customers asked for the man in charge. Every time someone laughed, she pushed harder. Every time someone doubted her, she found another gear. The voice of her late father echoed in her memory. Gravelly and calm. You don't earn respect by demanding it. Sarah, you earn it by bleeding for it. Now, standing under the rising flag, she felt those words settle deep in her chest like a promise. Recruits. The bark of Sergeant Cole ripped through the field like thunder. Cole was built like a tank, his skin sun-baked and his voice trained to carry across battlefields. He had seen too many soldiers come and go, the brave, the cocky, the broken. He scanned the lineup, eyes like rifle barrels. Then his gaze stopped on Sarah. His lips curled slightly. Well, hell. What's this? Someone lose their little sister? A ripple of laughter moved through the line. Sarah's neck flushed red, but she didn't flinch. Cole stepped closer, his boots crunching on the gravel. What's your name, recruit? Whitmore, sir, she said, voice steady. Whitmore? He looked her up and down. Tell me, Whitmore, you sure you're in the right place? The Girl Scouts are 2 miles that way. The laughter this time was louder. Sarah met his stare. Yes, sir. I'm sure. Something flickered in Cole's eyes. Maybe surprise, maybe curiosity. But he didn't let it show. We'll see about that, he muttered before turning back to the group. Training began at dawn the next day. It didn't take long for the physical pain to begin. Push-ups, burpees, sprints, crawling under barbed wire until their hands were shredded raw. The instructors were merciless. Sarah tried to keep pace, but every muscle screamed. By the 3rd day, she was falling behind. During an obstacle run, she missed the rope swing and fell straight into the mud pit below. Her uniform soaked, her pride bruised, she dragged herself out as the others jogged past her, snickering. One recruit called out, "Need a hand, sweetheart?" She ignored him. She climbed again, failed again, climbed again, failed again. By the 5th attempt, her hands were bleeding and shaking, but she refused to quit. She closed her eyes, pictured her father standing beside the family's old pickup truck, wiping his hands on a rag, smiling that quiet smile he always had. You got more fight in you than most, kid, he had once told her. Don't waste it trying to fit in. Prove why you belong. When she opened her eyes, she jumped, and this time she caught the rope. The recruits who had laughed fell silent as she pulled herself across the pit, teeth gritted, mud dripping from her uniform. She landed on the far side, panting, shaking, but standing tall. Sergeant Cole blew his whistle. About time, Whitmore. Took you long enough. She simply nodded. Yes, sir. There was no sarcasm, no emotion, just determination. By week 2, blisters covered her palms. Her arms ached constantly, and her bunkmates still treated her like a burden. She was polite, quiet, never snapped back. But when lights went out, while others fell into exhausted sleep, Sarah stayed awake, wrapping her hands in bandages, stretching, reviewing the training manual under her flashlight. Every night, she pushed herself. One more push-up, one more run around the yard, one more repetition with her rifle. The night guards often saw her running under the floodlights, breath visible in the cold air, face set like stone. One evening, after a long march, Mason, the tall recruit who'd mocked her first, walked past her bunk. You don't quit, do you? he muttered. Sarah didn't look up from polishing her boots. "No, I don't." He said nothing else, but the next morning, when someone joked about her height again, Mason didn't laugh. Midway through training came the endurance test, 5 miles in full gear under the Carolina sun. The air shimmered with heat, sweat dripped into eyes, and lungs burned. Sarah's boots felt heavier with every step. She lagged at the back, again the smallest in the group, again the one everyone assumed wouldn't finish. "Keep up, Whitmore," Cole barked from his jeep. "Or go home." Her vision blurred. She stumbled once, twice, nearly fell. But as her knees hit the dirt, her hand brushed the cool metal of the dog tags around her neck, her father's name engraved deep in steel. Something inside snapped back into focus. She got up. Step after step, she kept running, not faster than the rest, but longer. When the first recruits began dropping from exhaustion, Sarah passed them. She didn't stop when her shoulders screamed or when her boots filled with blood. She finished the run second to last, but she finished standing. Sergeant Cole didn't say a word, but as she walked past, he gave a single nod. The kind of nod soldiers gave when they recognized something real. Sarah said nothing, but she caught it, and she smiled. By the end of the month, things began to shift. The laughter didn't stop entirely, but it lost its edge. Her fellow recruits stopped underestimating her. They watched her carry extra gear for those who struggled. They saw her refuse to quit during drills that made stronger soldiers cry. And even Cole, though he never admitted it, started calling her name differently, not with mockery, but with expectation. That night, after lights out, Sarah sat by the window of the barracks, staring at the moonlit training field. Her hands trembled from exhaustion, but there was pride in her heart. She whispered into the quiet, "One day, they'll salute me." The thought wasn't arrogance. It was a promise, not to prove anyone wrong, but to honor the man who had believed in her first. Somewhere deep in her soul, she could almost hear her father's voice again. "Earn it, Sarah. Make them remember your name." And she would. By the end of training, no one would be laughing anymore. The winter frost finally began to melt, leaving behind puddles and thick patches of mud that clung to boots like cement. For most recruits, it meant relief. Warmer mornings, softer ground, and the end of frozen fingers. For Sarah Whitmore, it meant the beginning of something else entirely. Proof. After 3 months of being the girl who wouldn't quit, she wanted more than quiet respect. She wanted undeniable evidence, something no one could laugh away. The day started before dawn. The bugle screamed across Fort Jackson, echoing between the barracks. The recruits stumbled out half asleep, but Sarah was already awake, uniform pressed, boots laced, hair tied back with precision. She had been awake since 3 a.m., reading the Field Leadership Manual, a book the others hadn't touched since orientation. When they assembled on the range, Sergeant Cole stood at the front, clipboard in hand. "Today's test is simple," he said. "Marksmanship evaluation. You miss too many shots. You repeat the course. You hit perfect. You earn time off. Don't embarrass yourselves." The men cheered. Time off was gold. Cole's gaze slid across the group until it landed on Sarah. "Whitmore, you're first." A few recruits exchanged glances, smirking. One whispered, "Guess she cleared the range early. They'll have to drag her off after she misses." Sarah ignored them. She stepped forward, picked up her M4 carbine, and adjusted the scope. Her movements were methodical, almost graceful. Years working with her father in their garage had taught her to handle machines gently, to respect every part that could fail. Cole crossed his arms. Targets at 200, 300, and 500 meters. 10 rounds. Let's see what you've got. Sarah knelt, exhaled, and aimed. The world went silent. Crack, crack, crack. Each shot echoed across the range. When the smoke cleared, Cole lowered his binoculars, brow furrowed. All 10 bullets dead center. Bullseyes, he muttered, almost disbelieving. The recruits behind her stopped whispering. Cole looked up at her, his voice softer than usual. Not bad, Whitmore. Who taught you to shoot like that? My dad, sir, she replied. Said a steady hand comes from a steady heart. Cole didn't answer. He just gave a small nod. When the next recruit stepped up, everyone's eyes stayed on Sarah. For the first time, she wasn't invisible. That evening, the barracks buzzed with quiet talk. Mason, the tall recruit who used to mock her, walked over. You know, he said, if you keep that up, you're going to make the rest of us look bad. Sarah smiled, polishing her rifle. Then you better start practicing. He laughed, genuinely this time. The ice that had once divided them was melting. By the next morning, something had shifted in the platoon. The laughter hadn't disappeared completely, but it carried less venom. Sarah wasn't the girl who didn't belong anymore. She was Whitmore, the soldier who could shoot straighter, run longer, and endure more than most. But respect, she learned, didn't come easy, not even after bullseyes. 2 days later came the team field drill, a grueling 24-hour simulation designed to test leadership under pressure. Each group of 5 had to navigate 10 miles of forest terrain, build a defensive camp, and complete objectives while under enemy threat. Cole announced the teams. Sarah was grouped with Mason, Alvarez, and 2 others, Davis and Kerr. None of them looked thrilled. Listen, Davis said, adjusting his helmet. You might be good at shooting, but this is different. Out here, the slowest person can get everyone killed. Sarah met his stare calmly. Then let's make sure none of us are slow. They set off through the woods at dawn. The ground was slick with rain, and branches snapped underfoot. Within an hour, Davis slipped, nearly losing his pack down a ravine. Sarah grabbed him by the strap, pulling him back before he fell. He froze, eyes wide. You just saved me. She shrugged. Teamwork, right? They continued without another word. By nightfall, exhaustion set in. Their rations were nearly gone, their map half soaked. When they reached the checkpoint, Mason fell to his knees, gasping. Kerr muttered, We're done. Let's just call for extraction. Sarah looked at the sky, clouds rolling in, stars hidden. They were supposed to light a signal flare to mark completion, but it was too early. She could feel the storm coming. No, she said. We finish this. Lightning flashed across the treetops, illuminating her face. Mud streaked her cheeks, but her eyes burned steady. You want to be soldiers? Then prove it now, when it's hard. Something in her tone silenced them. They followed her lead. For the next 3 hours, Sarah pushed them through rain and darkness. She took the compass, led through the ravine, and found the last checkpoint moments before the storm hit. When they reached the extraction zone, drenched and shaking, the evaluators were waiting, dry, clipboard in hand. Cole stood among them. Took your time, he said. Didn't quit, though, Sarah answered. Cole's expression didn't change, but he marked something on his sheet. The next morning, during the after-action review, the platoon was silent as Cole spoke. Team 4 completed all objectives with minimal errors. Leadership evaluation. Satisfactory. He paused. Team 4's acting lead. Recruit Whitmore. Heads turned. Even Sarah looked surprised. Cole continued. When the group hit adverse conditions, one recruit took command without waiting for orders. That's initiative. That's what the Army needs. For a long moment, no one spoke. Then Mason grinned and clapped her on the shoulder. Guess we follow you next time, huh? Sarah smiled faintly. if you can keep up. The following week, the platoon moved into advanced drills, hand-to-hand combat, and urban tactics. Sarah struggled again. The men had reach and size. They could knock her down easily. During one sparring session, Davis hit her harder than intended, sending her to the mat. Cole barked, "Get up, Whitmore." Her vision blurred. The air left her lungs. She gasped but pushed herself to her knees. The room was silent, watching. She stood. Again, Davis looked uneasy. "You don't have to." She lunged before he could finish. Her elbow struck, sweeping him off balance. He hit the mat hard. Cole blew the whistle, half smiling. "Lesson for the day," he said. "Never assume you've already won." That night, Sarah's ribs ached, but she couldn't stop smiling. For once, the laughter around the barracks wasn't cruel. It was camaraderie, the sound of equals. One quiet evening, as the sun dipped low, Cole approached her by the training field. She stood alone, cleaning her rifle. "You know," he said, "when you first got here, I figured you'd last a week." Sarah glanced at him. "A lot of people did, sir." He nodded slowly. "You proved me wrong." "Don't get used to hearing that." "I won't, sir." He hesitated, then said, "Keep doing what you're doing. You've got something the others don't." Sarah looked out at the horizon, the flag waving in the distance. "I don't know what that is, sir." Cole's gaze followed hers. "You don't need to. Just don't lose it." He walked away, boots crunching over gravel. Sarah stood there for a long time after, watching the sky fade from orange to deep blue. For the first time, she felt a strange calm settle over her. She had stopped trying to prove she belonged. She knew she did. But deep down, she sensed that her real test hadn't even begun yet. Because in the Army, respect was earned every day, and sometimes it came only when the world was burning around you. The cold returned without warning. Fort Jackson's training fields, once painted gold by the early spring sun, were now swallowed by gray clouds and biting wind. For most recruits, it meant an extra layer of misery. For Sarah Whitmore, it meant the beginning of Hell Week, the infamous phase designed to push soldiers beyond exhaustion, fear, and self-doubt. Only the ones who refused to surrender would walk out of it whole. The day began at 0400 hours. The barracks lights flickered on, and Sergeant Cole's voice boomed through the hallway like a thunderclap. "On your feet, soldiers. Hell Week begins now. You've been trained, you've been tested, but you haven't been broken yet. That changes today." Sarah's stomach twisted with anticipation. Around her, recruits scrambled to dress, strapping gear and tightening boots. Mason gave her a nod as he pulled on his helmet. "See you on the other side, Whitmore." She smiled faintly, though her chest was tight. Minutes later, they stood in formation outside. The air was icy, and the mud thick. Cole paced in front of them, his face unreadable. "For the next 7 days, you will eat when told, sleep when told, and move until your bodies stop obeying. The ones who quit go home. The ones who endure become soldiers." He stopped and stared directly at Sarah. "If you've got something to prove, this is where you do it." The first challenge was a full-gear endurance march, 20 miles through uneven terrain, carrying 60 pounds on their backs. The group started strong, feet pounding the dirt in rhythm, but soon the weight began to dig into shoulders and spines. Sarah's hands blistered under the straps. The straps cut into her collarbone until she felt the warm sting of blood beneath her uniform. By mile 10, Mason stumbled beside her. "Can't feel my legs," he muttered, panting hard. Sarah adjusted his pack and helped him upright. "Then don't think about them," she said. "Just move." They moved. Step by step, breath by breath. Every mile became an act of defiance. When they finally crossed the finish line after 8 hours, Sarah collapsed to her knees, chest heaving. Cole's voice roared above them. "Welcome to the first sunrise of Hell Week." The recruits groaned, but Sarah looked up. The sky was streaked with fire-orange light, and despite the pain, something inside her sparked, a quiet pride. She had survived the first day. The next 2 days stripped away what little strength remained. The soldiers were denied sleep, allowed only 10-minute breaks scattered through 48 hours of continuous drills, crawling under barbed wire, dragging wounded mannequins, assembling rifles blindfolded, and wading chest-deep through freezing water. Sarah's hands were raw and bleeding. Every muscle screamed, every step sent pain shooting up her legs. On the third night, she barely stayed upright. Her vision blurred, and for a second, she swayed on her feet before collapsing. Cole stood over her, expression unreadable. "You done, Whitmore?" Her lips trembled. "No, sir." "Then stand up." Her body refused, but something deeper, something beyond strength, forced her to move. She pushed her palms into the mud and stood. Cole gave a small nod. "That's what a soldier looks like." Around her, other recruits began to fall away. Some called for medics. Others simply quit. By the fourth day, nearly a quarter of the platoon was gone. Sarah refused to be one of them. That night, they were ordered to complete the confidence gauntlet, a nightmare of obstacles built to test mental endurance. The air was cold enough to sting their lungs. The first task was a high wire crawl, a steel cable stretched 40 feet above the ground. Below was a pit of mud and freezing water. Sarah's hands trembled as she grabbed the wire. Eyes forward. Cole barked. She focused on the far side, blocking out the wind whipping against her face. Every inch forward burned. At the halfway point, her hand slipped. She dangled, legs kicking over the darkness below. A collective gasp rippled through the group. Her heart pounded, but she gritted her teeth and tightened her grip. Slowly, she pulled herself back onto the wire. Inch by inch, she crawled the rest of the way until she dropped safely to the other side. When she hit the ground, mud splashed up her uniform, but the adrenaline drowned out everything else. She stood, shaking but smiling. Cole's voice carried across the field. "That's how you fight gravity, with guts." The next task was worse. They called it the pit. Recruits were ordered to crawl through a tunnel half filled with water and mud, under barbed wire, while simulated gunfire echoed above. The air inside was suffocating. Sarah could barely breathe as she pulled herself forward, the wire inches from her back. Mud filled her mouth and ears. When she finally emerged, she was coughing, soaked, and half-blind. Mason stumbled out behind her, laughing between gasps. "Still think this was a good idea?" She managed a weak grin. "Ask me after day 7. By the 5th day, the exhaustion had reached its breaking point. The recruits moved like ghosts, silent and hollow-eyed. Sleep deprivation twisted their perception. Shadows looked like enemies. The wind sounded like voices. Sarah began seeing flashes of memory. Her father's workshop, the day he gave her his old compass, telling her, "No matter where you go, this will remind you who you are." That memory became her anchor. Every time she wanted to stop, she pictured his face, tired but proud, and she kept moving. On the 6th night, the storm came. Rain hammered the camp, turning the ground into a swamp. The recruits were ordered to dig trenches and hold position for 6 straight hours while the wind screamed around them. Sarah's hands were numb, her uniform soaked through. Her rifle jammed twice from the mud. Beside her, Mason shivered uncontrollably. "We can't hold like this," he said through chattering teeth. "Yes, we can," she answered, voice hoarse. "Because if we don't, they'll pull us out." And I'm not leaving this week unfinished. For the first time, Mason didn't argue. They kept digging. When dawn broke, the storm passed, and silence blanketed the field. Cole walked among the trenches, inspecting the recruits. His eyes lingered on Sarah, her face caked in mud, uniform torn, hands shaking but steady on her rifle. "You look like hell, Whitmore," he said quietly. She managed a cracked smile. "Feels like it too, sir." He almost smiled back. "Good. Means you're learning." The final day arrived with no announcement. The recruits were lined up at sunrise. Cole stood before them, clipboard in hand, eyes sweeping across what remained of his platoon. Out of 68 who began, only 37 stood there now, pale, bruised, hollow-eyed, but unbroken. Cole's tone was calm now. "You've been through fire, frost, and fear. Some of you wanted to quit. Some of you nearly did. But those who stayed, you've earned something no rank or medal can give. You've earned belief." He paused, eyes locking on Sarah. "Whitmore, step forward." She hesitated, then obeyed. Cole nodded once. "During this week, you showed leadership, discipline, and endurance beyond expectation. You didn't just survive, you carried others. That's what a soldier does. Congratulations. You just completed the hardest week of your life." For a long moment, Sarah couldn't speak. Then she straightened, exhaustion melting into pride. "Thank you, sir." Cole leaned closer, lowering his voice. "Don't thank me yet. The real battles don't happen here. They happen when no one's watching." When the dismissal finally came, Sarah walked back toward the barracks, boots heavy with mud, eyes stinging from the rising sun. Mason jogged up beside her, grinning weakly. "We made it, Whitmore." She looked over at him, her smile faint but real. "Yeah, but I think something in me stayed back there." He laughed quietly. "Good. Maybe that's what it takes." As they reached the gates, the wind carried the faint echo of Cole's voice, calling the next group to form up, a reminder that Hell Week never truly ended. It just moved to the next soldier. Sarah paused, looked back once, then forward again. Her legs trembled, her body broken, but her spirit, her will, felt unshakable. For the first time since she'd arrived, she didn't feel like she was proving anything anymore. She was becoming what she was meant to be. The cargo bay rattled like a dying engine as the C-17 cut through the night sky over the desert. Inside, rows of soldiers sat shoulder to shoulder, rifles between their knees, faces half lit by the red cabin light. Some prayed silently, some gripped photos of family, and others stared at nothing. Sarah Whitmore sat near the back, helmet resting on her thigh, eyes fixed on the dull metal floor. The hum of the aircraft vibrated through her boots, but her mind was somewhere else. Fort Jackson, the mud, the sleepless nights, Sergeant Cole's voice hammering discipline into her bones. It all seemed like another lifetime. This was no longer training. This was deployment. 5 minutes out. The loadmaster shouted over the roar of the engines. Sarah inhaled deeply. She was part of Echo Company, assigned to a remote base near the Afghan border, a region nicknamed the Anvil because it crushed the unprepared. For months, insurgent ambushes had been rising, convoys disappearing, patrols cut off. Now, Echo Company was being sent to stabilize the sector. The jump light switched from red to green. The ramp dropped, flooding the bay with hot desert wind. Sand and darkness rushed in. One by one, boots hit the dirt, and Sarah followed, landing hard, her gear jolting against her ribs. The heat was suffocating, the smell of dust and fuel thick in the air. "Welcome to the Anvil," her new commanding officer, Captain Torres, said grimly as he approached. He was a hard man with tired eyes. "You've got 30 minutes to unload and report." After that, you're mine. For the next week, Sarah learned the rhythm of life in a combat zone, the endless hum of helicopters, the static chatter of radios, the uneasy quiet that settled before dawn. She bunked in a tent with Mason and a handful of others from her training platoon. They'd stuck together through every test, and though Mason joked about everything, the humor couldn't hide his nerves. "You ever think about what happens if we freeze out there?" he asked one night as they cleaned their rifles. Sarah didn't look up. "We don't freeze," she said simply. "We move." He gave a short laugh. Still the same Whitmore. But she wasn't. Something had changed in her. A calm that came not from confidence, but acceptance. She knew fear would come. She just refused to bow to it. 3 days later, their first patrol went sideways. Echo Company was moving through a narrow valley known for ambushes, a dry riverbed flanked by jagged cliffs. The air was silent, too silent. Even the wind seemed to be holding its breath. "Stay sharp," Torres ordered. "Eyes up, fingers on safety." Sarah scanned the ridge with her scope, heartbeat steady. Then came a flash. The explosion tore through the lead Humvee, a thunderclap of smoke and debris. Shrapnel screamed through the air. Soldiers hit the ground, shouting, ducking for cover. Mason's voice crackled through the comms. "We're hit, we're hit." Before Sarah could answer, gunfire erupted from the ridges, automatic bursts raining down like metal rain. She crawled behind a boulder, dust and gravel biting her skin. The air smelled like burned rubber and blood. "Enemy positions northeast ridge." Someone shouted. Sarah pressed her back against the stone, hands trembling just enough for her to notice. This was the moment, the one every soldier secretly wonders about, what you do when the bullets are real. She closed her eyes for half a second. Her father's voice echoed faintly. "You don't fight fear by running. You fight it by aiming straight through it." She exhaled, steadied her rifle, and rose. Her first shot cracked through the chaos, hitting a muzzle flash halfway up the cliff. Another burst followed, and another, not wild, but measured. Training taking over. "Whitmore, cover left flank." Torres yelled. She moved, rolling behind another rock, firing in short bursts to suppress the enemy's line. Mason joined her, his face streaked with sweat and dust. "Remind me to never doubt you again," he yelled between shots. "Too late," she shouted back. For 20 minutes, the firefight raged. Bursts of gunfire, explosions, shouted orders. Then, slowly, the sound faded. The ridges went quiet, except for the moan of the desert wind. The insurgents were retreating. Torres ordered a ceasefire. Sarah's chest heaved, adrenaline still surging. Around her, medics were already tending to the wounded. She spotted the twisted wreckage of the lead Humvee. 3 soldiers gone, 5 injured. She walked over, knees weak but steady, and helped pull a survivor free from the wreckage. The man's leg was shredded, his eyes glazed. "You're gonna make it," she whispered, even though she wasn't sure she believed it. By nightfall, the valley was littered with shell casings and burnt rubber. Drones circled overhead, scanning for heat signatures. Sarah sat beside Mason on the dirt, both too exhausted to speak. When Torres finally approached, his boots were caked in ash. He looked at her long and hard. "That was clean shooting, Whitmore. You kept your head." "Just did my job, sir," she said quietly. He shook his head. "You did more than that. You saved half the flank." She said nothing. Praise didn't sit easily with her. But later that night, when the stars came out over the endless desert, she let herself breathe. She thought of home, her father's shop, the smell of oil and coffee, the compass he'd given her. She reached into her pocket and touched it, worn and scratched, but still ticking true. For the next several weeks, Sarah became known around camp, not for her rank, but for her reliability. She never froze under fire. She took the hardest posts without complaint. When a supply convoy was pinned down outside the base, she volunteered to lead the rescue, 3 vehicles against unknown resistance. Torres hesitated, but nodded. Take Mason. Bring them home. They left under moonlight, engines whispering against the sand. The desert stretched endlessly, beautiful and deadly, all at once. Halfway to the convoy, the radio crackled. A distress signal, close. Sarah ordered a stop. Mason, you hear that? He nodded. 2 clicks east. They turned their lights off and advanced slowly. What they found made her blood run cold. A truck overturned, fire still smoldering, and 4 soldiers pinned beneath it. Insurgent tracks led away into the dunes. Without hesitation, Sarah jumped from the vehicle and sprinted toward the wreck. Bullets whizzed past from somewhere in the dark. She ducked behind the burning truck, heart hammering, and started pulling debris off one of the trapped men. Mason returned fire, shouting, "We've got 2 minutes before they circle back." "Then make it count," she yelled. One by one, they dragged the wounded out. Sarah took a round in her shoulder, a sharp, searing pain, but didn't stop. Blood soaked her sleeve, but she kept pulling until the last soldier was clear. When the final Humvee rolled up for extraction, Sarah was the last to climb aboard. Her arm hung limp, her uniform burned through, but her eyes were steady. The ambush was over. Every man she'd rescued was alive. Back at base, medics patched her up. Torres stood beside the cot, arms folded. "You disobeyed the perimeter order," he said, voice low. "Yes, sir." "You also saved 4 men who wouldn't be breathing right now." She met his gaze. "Sir, I just did what anyone would have done." He stared for a long moment. "No, Whitmore. Most people would have waited for orders." He paused, then added quietly, "The general's visiting next week. I'll be recommending you for commendation." The words didn't fully register. She wasn't doing this for medals or names on a list. But when Mason grinned across the room and whispered, "Told you you'd make history," she couldn't help but smile back, weak but proud. That night, she stepped outside the infirmary, the desert wind brushing against her face. The horizon glowed faintly from distant fires, reminders that the war never really slept. She looked up at the stars and whispered, "Hope you're watching, Dad." Somewhere out there, under the same sky, she imagined him nodding, saying what he always said, "Keep fighting, kid. You're not done yet." And deep down, she knew, the salute that would silence every doubt, the moment she'd truly be seen, was still waiting ahead. The base was quiet that morning, deceptive in its calm. Sarah Whitmore walked across the sand-scorched tarmac, her shoulders still tender from the ambush, boots crunching on gravel. Word of her actions during the convoy rescue had spread quickly, a whispered legend among the soldiers. Some called her reckless. Some called her fearless. One thing was certain. No one doubted her courage. Inside the operations tent, maps covered every available surface. Torres briefed the company on the day's patrol, but Sarah's mind kept drifting back to the general's upcoming visit. She had heard rumors he might step onto the base in a week, inspecting operations firsthand. To Sarah, it wasn't about recognition. It was about showing that persistence, discipline, and focus could turn the smallest recruit into a soldier capable of saving lives. As she strapped on her gear, a voice behind her made her pause. "You think they're really going to honor you for that stunt?" Mason asked, adjusting his own pack. Sarah didn't turn. "I don't care if they honor me. I care that everyone comes home alive." Mason frowned. "Yeah, but you've got people watching now. Some of the officers don't like being outshined." "Then they'll have to get used to it," she replied, voice firm. By midday, the patrol was underway. Echo Company navigated winding canyons, scanning for any sign of insurgents. Sarah moved at the head of the group, rifle at the ready, eyes scanning every shadow, every rock formation. The desert seemed calm, but she knew better. Every mile held the potential for another ambush, another life-or-death decision. 3 hours in, they spotted movement, a small group of armed men appearing over a ridge. Sarah signaled to halt. Torres approached quietly, binoculars in hand. Possible insurgent scouts. Take positions. Sarah dropped behind a boulder, assessing the terrain. Her mind worked fast. Distance, cover, escape routes. She realized that with a coordinated, precise response, they could neutralize the threat without losing a single soldier. "Whitmore," Torres said, lowering his voice, "I'm giving you the lead." "Call it." Her heart pounded. She was no longer training. This was real. She inhaled slowly, then nodded. "We move in suppressive fire, maintain elevation advantage. Davis and Alvarez flank left. Mason covers rear. I'll take right ridge." Torres studied her for a long second. "Do it." Minutes later, the firefight erupted. Sarah moved like a shadow, firing measured bursts, coordinating with her teammates. Bullets kicked up sand around her. The insurgents were skilled, but they weren't expecting precision, communication, and courage all at once. By the time the dust settled, 4 insurgents were neutralized, and not a single member of Echo Company was down. Back at the base, word of her tactical leadership reached the general's aides. They had been observing remotely, reviewing after-action reports and drone footage. Sarah's name surfaced repeatedly. That evening, a formal briefing brought Sarah face-to-face with officers she barely knew. Some smiled politely. Others avoided her eyes. Captain Torres introduced her to the base's liaison. "This is Recruit Whitmore." She demonstrated exemplary leadership during today's patrol. Her actions likely saved multiple lives. Sarah inclined her head. "Thank you, sir." One officer, a tall, sharp-eyed major, leaned back in his chair, lips pressed tightly. "Impressive," he said, voice dripping with skepticism. "But it's not a one-person show in the field. The entire company acted." Sarah's jaw tightened, but she said nothing. She knew the politics of recognition ran deeper than bravery. That night, she sat in her tent cleaning her rifle, her mind replaying every shot, every command, every decision from the patrol. Mason glanced at her from his bunk. "You're not worried about them downplaying it?" he asked. Sarah shook her head. "I'm not here for their approval. I'm here to do my job." 3 days later, the general arrived. Word traveled fast. The base buzzed like an electric wire. Soldiers fell into formation, boots in perfect alignment, eyes forward. The general was a tall man, with silver hair and piercing blue eyes, his presence commanding silence instantly. He walked past the rows of soldiers, inspecting their uniforms, their demeanor, their bearing. When he reached Echo Company, he paused. His gaze swept across the recruits before it landed on Sarah. He stopped. Something in the way she stood, shoulders squared, chin high, eyes unwavering, caught his attention. "Whitmore," he said, his voice carrying authority without shouting. Sarah stepped forward, heart hammering, but maintaining perfect composure. "Sir, yes, sir," she said. The general studied her, eyes narrowing slightly. "I've been reviewing your actions during the convoy ambush," he said. "Tell me, why did you take the initiative when you did?" Sarah inhaled slowly. "Sir, our men were pinned. Hesitation would have cost lives. I simply did what needed to be done to ensure everyone came home." The general nodded slowly. "Most would hesitate. Most would wait for orders. You acted. You protected lives. That is the essence of leadership. He turned to Torres, who stood stiffly at attention. "Is this accurate?" "Yes, sir." "Every word," Torres replied. The general looked back at Sarah. "You're the kind of soldier this army needs. Courage, discipline, judgment." "And yet," he paused, "I imagine you faced more doubt than support." Sarah swallowed. She thought of Fort Jackson, the laughter, the sneers, the mud, the cold. "Yes, sir," she said quietly. "But I learned to keep moving, sir. No matter what." The general's expression softened slightly. "Good, that's what it takes. You've earned respect here. Not just from me, but from every soldier who saw what you did. Continue like this, and you'll be an example for others to follow." As he saluted her, a hush fell over the assembled soldiers. Some mouths gaped. Some eyes widened. They had trained with her, seen her struggle, seen her rise, but this was a moment none would forget. A female recruit, underestimated, laughed at in training, now being recognized by the highest-ranking officer present. Sarah returned the salute, her hand firm despite the exhaustion coursing through her body. In that instant, everything, every sleepless night, every blister, every drop of mud, felt vindicated. The next days were a blur. Reports circulated across the base, praising her leadership. Some soldiers whispered about her skill, others about the general's rare acknowledgement. Not everyone was happy. Jealousy and resentment simmered in certain corners, but Sarah focused only on her duties. Every patrol, every convoy escort, every strategic decision reinforced the same principle. Survival depended on discipline, courage, and commitment, not rank or approval. Mason nudged her one afternoon as they unloaded supplies. "You know, some people are already calling you the ghost who can't be stopped," he said, half joking. She laughed softly, brushing dust from her uniform. "Let them talk. I'm just here to make sure we all make it home." By the end of the week, the general departed. But his words remained with her. "You've earned respect here, Whitmore. Never let anyone take that from you." That night, under the desert stars, Sarah looked out across the base. The war was far from over. Ambushes, patrols, and danger awaited every day. But she no longer questioned her place. She had fought through ridicule, exhaustion, fire, and cold. Now she was a soldier recognized not just for surviving, but for leading. And deep down, she knew this was only the beginning. The desert night was darker than usual, the wind carrying the scent of dust and gunpowder. Sarah Whitmore moved silently along the perimeter with Mason and Alvarez, rifles raised, scanning for any sign of movement. Echo Company had been on high alert since a series of insurgent attacks threatened nearby convoys. The base itself felt tense. Soldiers whispered in corners, and even Captain Torres seemed more restless than usual. Sarah's instincts were sharp. Something didn't feel right. Her eyes swept over the sand dunes beyond the perimeter, shadows stretching unnaturally in the moonlight. She could hear the faint hum of distant vehicles and the crackle of combs, but something else lingered, a presence, deliberate, watching. "Hold," she whispered to Mason. He froze beside her. "You sense it too?" "Yes, something's off." "Wait for my call." Minutes stretched into eternity. The wind shifted, carrying a new sound, soft, deliberate footsteps crunching on gravel. Sarah signaled with her hand, and the team sank low. She focused, listening. The steps weren't random. They were tactical, moving like trained soldiers. "Could be reinforcements," Alvarez muttered. "No," Sarah said firmly. "These are not ours." By the time the shadowy figures emerged from behind a ridge, Sarah realized with a jolt that this wasn't just an insurgent scouting party. The men were wearing the camouflage and insignia of American forces, a rogue faction within their own lines. "They're compromised," she said through gritted teeth. "Call it in." Mason fumbled with the radio. Static. No signal. The line to command was jammed. They cut us off, Alvarez said. Sarah's mind raced. Retreat wasn't an option. The perimeter was compromised, and too many soldiers relied on them. She crouched lower, surveying the terrain. The attackers were well-trained, disciplined, the kind of people who had been inside the base before. Someone had betrayed Echo Company. "Follow my lead," Sarah whispered. "We're taking them by surprise." Her heart pounded. She had trained for combat under the harshest conditions, but this felt different. This was treachery, not just fire and chaos, but betrayal from people who should have been allies. The first shot rang out as Sarah took aim, hitting the lead rogue soldier square in the chest. The man collapsed without a sound. She signaled to Mason, and Alvarez fired simultaneously, suppressing the remaining attackers. Sarah moved forward, adrenaline sharpening her senses. Every decision had to be precise. One wrong move, and they'd be overwhelmed. By the time the firefight ended, 3 of the rogue soldiers lay incapacitated. The others had retreated, disappearing into the desert night. The silence that followed was eerie. The perimeter was still vulnerable, but Echo Company had survived the immediate threat. Sarah's hands shook slightly as she holstered her weapon. Mason leaned against a sandbag, breathing heavily. "I've never seen anyone move like that," he said quietly. "Neither have I," Alvarez replied. Captain Torres arrived moments later, eyes scanning the scene. "Report," he demanded. Sarah stepped forward, recounting every movement, every decision. Torres listened intently, nodding. When she finished, he finally said, "You saved lives tonight, Whitmore. This could have been catastrophic. Well done." She nodded silently, but inside, a fire burned hotter than ever. Someone within their own ranks had tried to destroy them, and she knew it wasn't the end. The next day, the base erupted with tension. Investigations began immediately. Soldiers whispered about the breach, some fearful, others angry. Sarah stayed focused, reviewing patrol plans, ensuring that no further weaknesses could be exploited. Her leadership was evident to all. She wasn't just a survivor. She was a strategist, a sentinel, a force to be reckoned with. Yet the betrayal weighed on her. Every decision she made now carried more consequence. Trust was no longer given lightly. She had to be vigilant, not just against enemies in the field, but against shadows within her own lines. 3 days later, another patrol. The desert sun blazed overhead, baking the sand into a reflective glare. Sarah led the convoy, eyes scanning the horizon with unwavering focus. Suddenly, a flare erupted from a distant ridge, a signal. Sarah's pulse quickened. She realized it was a trap. She motioned to stop. Hold position. Eyes sharp. Gunfire erupted from both sides. The attackers were insurgents, but the pattern mirrored the previous betrayal, coordinated, precise, anticipating their movements. Sarah recognized immediately that someone had leaked their patrol routes. "Stay low," she shouted. We moved together, cover each other. The firefight lasted for what felt like hours. Bullets kicked up sand, ricocheting around their position. Sarah's training took over. She issued commands, coordinated suppressive fire, and led countermaneuvers that saved the convoy from disaster. Several soldiers were injured, but thanks to her guidance, no lives were lost. When the battle finally subsided, Torres approached, his uniform scorched, his face grim. "Whitmore, I don't know how you did it. They knew our moves. They were ready for us. But you," he shook his head, "you kept everyone alive." Sarah's chest heaved. Her shoulder still throbbed from the previous engagement. Her arms burned from holding her weapon, but she stood straight. "I just did what needed to be done, sir." Torres studied her for a long moment. No, you did more than that. You anticipated, adapted, and executed flawlessly. That's leadership in its purest form. News of her actions spread quickly through the ranks. Soldiers began to talk openly about the ghost in the desert. A soldier who moved through fire, betrayal, and chaos with precision and courage. Some officers grew wary of her rising reputation, whispering about favoritism and recognition. Others admired her quietly, inspired by the bravery and clarity she displayed under extreme conditions. A week later, the general returned to the base. The visit was routine, inspecting operations, checking morale. But when he reached Echo Company, the stories of the ambush, the betrayal, and the convoy rescue had already reached him. He scanned the group of soldiers, eyes falling on Sarah. "Recruit Whitmore," he said, his voice commanding attention. Sarah stepped forward, salute crisp and unwavering. The general's eyes softened slightly as he studied her. "I've heard much about your actions, leadership, bravery, initiative. You acted decisively under fire, saved lives, and prevented disaster when others hesitated. That is commendable." He paused, letting the words sink in for the assembled soldiers. Then he saluted her. For a moment, the desert seemed to hold its breath. Every recruit who had doubted her, every officer who had scoffed at her training performance, froze. The general's salute was not just recognition, it was validation, a public acknowledgement that her courage, discipline, and skill had earned her a place among the best. Sarah returned the salute, steady, composed. She didn't smile, didn't speak, but inside, she felt a swell of pride, a confirmation that the years of ridicule, exhaustion, and perseverance had led to this moment. The general lowered his hand. "Let her serve as an example. To all of you, courage is not gendered. It is earned. Whitmore has earned it." Mason nudged her as the general walked away. "You just froze everyone in place," he whispered. Sarah allowed herself the smallest smile. "Not me," she said softly. "The general did." That night, as the stars spread across the desert sky, Sarah stood outside the tent, gazing at the horizon. The betrayal, the firefights, the exhaustion, it all still weighed on her. But she knew something fundamental. She had earned respect, not through words or medals, but through action, courage, and unyielding persistence. And in the harsh light of the desert dawn, she understood that this was only the beginning. The war would continue. Challenges would come. But no matter what lay ahead, Sarah Whitmore would face it head-on, the soldier who refused to be underestimated, the one who had earned the salute of a general. The morning sun rose over Fort Benning, cutting through the mist that hovered above the training fields. The air carried the familiar sounds of boots hitting dirt, the echo of commands, and the sharp crack of rifles in the distance. For most soldiers, it was just another day of drills. But for Sarah Whitmore, it was the day everything came full circle. Months had passed since that fateful night in the desert, the betrayal, the firefight, and the moment the general himself saluted her before an entire division. The photo of that salute had spread across bases and news networks alike. "Courage beyond rank," one headline had called it. Another read, "She earned the salute that stopped the base cold." But Sarah didn't dwell on fame. She'd returned to the basics, to training, teaching, and leading quietly. The more attention the world gave her, the more she wanted to refocus on what mattered, shaping the next generation of soldiers. This morning, she stood at the edge of the parade field, clipboard in hand, watching a new group of recruits struggle through their first endurance drill. Mud streaked their faces, exhaustion clouded their eyes. She saw herself in them, uncertain, underestimated, yet burning with hidden fire. Sergeant Cole, the same man who once called her fragile, walked up beside her, his tone different now, respectful. "Hard to believe that was me yelling at you to drop and give me 20, he said with a half-smile. Sarah returned the smile faintly. "You were doing your job. I needed that push." He nodded, watching the recruits. "You changed this place, Whitmore. They all talk about you. The one who didn't quit, who proved us all wrong." "I didn't set out to prove anyone wrong," she said softly. "I just didn't want to prove them right." Cole chuckled, shaking his head. Still sharp. The bass loudspeaker crackled, interrupting their moment. "Attention all personnel. Assembly in Hall Bravo in 30 minutes. Mandatory attendance." Sarah exchanged a puzzled glance with Cole. Assemblies were rare, and mandatory ones even rarer. 30 minutes later, the training hall buzzed with energy. Hundreds of soldiers filled the room, lining up by unit. Flags hung along the walls, the American banner draped proudly behind the podium. Sarah took her place near the front, standing beside Captain Torres and several other officers. When the general entered, the room snapped to attention instantly. His steps were measured, his expression unreadable. He stopped at the podium and surveyed the crowd before speaking. "At ease," he began, his voice deep and commanding. "We stand here today not to honor victory in combat, but victory of spirit, the kind that defines what it truly means to wear this uniform." He paused, letting the words settle before continuing. "A soldier among you has demonstrated what I call unshakable integrity, the courage to lead when others hesitate, to endure when others fall, and to rise without seeking recognition." Sarah's stomach tightened as the general's gaze swept over the room and finally landed on her. "Sergeant Sarah Whitmore, step forward." The room murmured. Cole grinned proudly. Torres nodded approvingly. Sarah stepped out from the line, her boots clicking on the polished floor as she approached the stage. The general continued, "In my 35 years of service, I've saluted presidents, heroes, and fallen comrades. But few have earned my respect the way you have. Through adversity, betrayal, and combat, you exemplified what every soldier strives to be: resilient, disciplined, and true." He motioned for her to stand at attention. Then, to everyone's surprise, he removed a medal from the velvet case beside him. "By the authority vested in me as commanding officer, I hereby present Sergeant Whitmore with the Silver Star for valor and leadership under fire." Applause erupted across the hall, roaring like thunder. Sarah's vision blurred slightly as she felt the weight of the medal rest against her chest. The medal was cold, grounding, real heavy with meaning. The general leaned in slightly, lowering his voice so only she could hear. "You didn't just change how people see women in uniform, Sergeant. You changed how we see leadership itself." Sarah swallowed hard, nodding. "Thank you, sir." When she stepped back, the applause didn't stop. Soldiers who once mocked her now stood taller. Some even saluted her voluntarily, a gesture born not from protocol, but respect. Cole clapped the loudest, his grin wide and proud. After the ceremony, the crowd dispersed slowly, but Sarah stayed behind, standing before the flag. The silence of the empty hall wrapped around her like an embrace. Captain Torres approached quietly. "You know, I've seen a lot of soldiers come and go," he said, "but very few leave a legacy that lasts beyond their service. You've done that." Sarah smiled faintly. "A legacy isn't what I was aiming for. I just wanted to do my job right." Torres chuckled. "That's why it became one." That evening, the sun dipped low over the base, painting the horizon in gold and crimson. Sarah sat alone on a bench outside the barracks, holding her father's dog tags. The metal was worn smooth, edges dulled by time and memory. She remembered his voice, calm, steady, full of pride. "If you fall, you get up. If they doubt you, you prove them wrong. That's what a Whitmore does." She closed her eyes, tears slipping down her cheeks as the wind whispered through the nearby flagpoles. "I did it, Dad," she murmured. "I finally did it." A voice interrupted her thoughts. "Sergeant Whitmore?" She turned to see Mason approaching, his usual grin softened by genuine emotion. The general's message hit the whole base. "Everyone's talking about you again. You're a legend now." Sarah laughed quietly. "Legends are just people who didn't quit long enough to be remembered." "Maybe," he said, sitting beside her. "But some legends inspire others to start." They sat in silence, watching recruits jog past the field in formation, their chants echoing through the air. Sarah noticed one young woman at the front, smaller than the others, struggling but determined. The sight made her heart tighten. "That was me once," she said softly. Mason nodded. "Now she has you to look up to." Sarah smiled. "Then I'd better make sure she has the right example." Weeks later, the training academy held a leadership seminar for new recruits. Sarah was invited as the keynote speaker, the first non-officer to ever lead the session. The hall was packed. Fresh faces full of fear and hope stared up at her as she took the podium. She didn't read from notes. She didn't need to. "I used to think strength meant being the loudest in the room," she began. "It doesn't. It means being the one who still stands when everyone else has fallen. Respect isn't given to you. You earn it one decision at a time, in the mud, in the cold, when no one's watching." The recruits listened, silent, hanging on every word. "When they laugh at you," she continued, her voice firm, "remember, laughter fades, but what you build out of it doesn't. Every hardship, every insult, every failure, it's just fuel. Use it." When she finished, the hall erupted in applause. General Harlan stood in the back, his face unreadable, but his hands coming together slowly in approval. Cole, Mason, and Torres were there too, standing tall, proud. As Sarah stepped off the stage, a young recruit approached nervously. "Ma'am, can I ask something?" Sarah smiled kindly. "Of course." The recruit hesitated. "Did you ever think of quitting?" Sarah's gaze softened, her mind flickering back to the sleepless nights, the laughter, the pain, the exhaustion, and then the general's salute, the silver star, her father's voice. "Every day," she admitted, "but I never let it win." The recruit nodded, eyes shining with new resolve. That night, Sarah walked across the silent field one last time before lights out. The stars were bright, infinite, unwavering. She stopped near the flagpole, hand resting over her heart. In that moment, she wasn't the girl who'd been laughed at, doubted, or dismissed. She was a soldier who had stood her ground, who had earned her salute, who had become the reason others believed they could too. The flag rippled gently in the breeze, catching the moonlight. And beneath it, Sarah Whitmore smiled, the soldier who proved that true strength has no uniform, and respect has no gender. She never quit. Ever again.